For someone who is deep in the world of psychology, you initially pursued a pre-med track and were a chemistry major in college.
That's
What drew
right.
you to medicine at first, and what was it about psychology that sparked a shift in your passion?
Okay. Well, I think most young people probably can generate about six professions, medicine being one of them. So, and I assume all my life I've been interested in helping people. I'm so old now, I can't remember exactly the motivation, but I do know what led me into psychology. First, as a chem major, I found that I'd leave the lab a different color every day. I was practicing Jewish chemistry, which is a little is good, a little more is better, which was not appropriate. Anyway, I enjoyed it, but then decided I was getting married. I was very young, and I didn't know if I was going to end up finishing med school. So I thought I should broaden my base and take some other courses. And then I took a course with Phil Zimbardo in psychology, and that changed everything. He was spectacular.
Much of your work in psychology, the way that I see it, is it explores how perception shapes reality.
Yeah.
Simply speaking, how much of life is perception?
Well, virtually all of it. That when you're seeing something, the way you're seeing it can be one of several different ways. But that particular view tends to guide what you're thinking, doing, wanting, and so on. So it's the major player, I think. But my work was always focused on finding very small factors that seem to have very large effects. So one of the early studies in nursing homes where we simply gave elderly people choices to make, and then found 18 months later that those given these mindful choices live longer.
I'm a big believer that we all have personal experiences that really spark our curiosities or what are the launching pad for the work that we do.
Mhm.
And there's two personal experiences in your life that I find really interesting. So the first one is, and they both relate to the women in your life.
Oh,
So your mother had breast cancer, which spread
yeah,
to her pancreas, and then
right.
it unexpectedly disappeared in a way that the medical world couldn't explain. And then when you were in grad school, your grandmother was dealing with symptoms in her head that ultimately went misdiagnosed. And then when she had an autopsy, they found that she had a brain tumor.
Right. Yeah.
How do you think those intimate and personal experiences shape the trajectory of your work and the energy behind your work?
Yeah, I think for most people, you can only think about things that occur to you, and what occurs to you is likely to be what you're experiencing. And I think that there was a set of circumstances prior to my mother's, which was important to me and a fun story. So, in The Mindful Body, as you know, it was first written as a memoir. So, there are lots of personal stories and then became what it is. Okay. One of these stories was about, as I said before, I was married when I was obscenely young. We went to Paris on our honeymoon. We're in a restaurant and I ordered a mixed grill. On the mixed grill was pancreas. And I asked my then husband which of these things was the pancreas. He pointed to something. I ate everything else, and now came the moment of truth. Could I get myself to eat the pancreas? Which, for some bizarre reason, I thought I had to, because now, after all, I was a married woman. And I start eating it, and I literally get sick. He then starts to laugh, and I say, "Why are you laughing?" Inappropriate, right on our honeymoon, if ever, anytime. And he said, "Because that's chicken. You ate the pancreas a long time ago." So I had made myself sick. The instance with my mother, she had made herself well. There was more going on than I was being taught by the books I was reading, the courses I was taking, and I was interested in finding out. Eventually, what I did was come up with the mind body unity theory, which drew from these early experiences, but without me knowing it. I didn't eat the pancreas. I ate the pancreas, nothing happened, and that was the end until I developed this theory, which essentially says, we have a notion, mind and body. And as long as we have a mind and a body in our minds, the question is, how do they talk to each other? How do you get from a fuzzy thing, a thought, to something material called the body? And everybody knows that your thoughts affect your body. And an example I'm fond of using, you're walking down the street and a leaf blows in your face, and before you know it's a leaf, you get scared, your blood pressure increases, your pulse, and so on. All right. But they couldn't explain it because, again, we have these two. And I said, well, wait a second. These are just words. Let's put the mind and body back together as one thing. And if the mind and body are one thing, then wherever we're putting one, we're necessarily putting the other. Now, placebos are probably our best medicine and the early example of all of this, right? You take something, it's nothing, it's inert, right? Sugar pill or whatever. You think it's something, and then you heal. And so I went ahead to study this mind body unity in lots of different settings, and the results I think are very persuasive. But the first of these was the fun counterclockwise study. Now, this is a study, if you don't know, you can watch The Simpsons Go to Havana because they talk about it. But let me give you a brief description. So, what we did was we retrofitted a retreat to 20 years earlier and then had elderly men live there as if they were their younger selves. So they were talking about past things as if they were just unfolding. And, decorating the place was not on Hollywood scale. I didn't have the budget for that, but there was nothing to remind them that now is now. Okay. Anyway, in a brief time, a week, living as if they were their younger selves resulted in their vision improving, their hearing, their strength, their memory, and they looked noticeably younger. So that was pretty compelling. What's going on here? Then, fast forward, we do several other studies. People can read the book, The Mindful Body, to see all of them. But let me just, the next one, say, is the chambermaid study that I did with Ali Crum when she was at Harvard. Okay, so you ask chambermaids how much exercise do they get? And surprisingly, since they're working all day long, they say they're not getting any exercise because they think exercise is what you do after work. And after work, they're too tired. Okay, so they don't realize they're getting exercise. We divide them into two groups. Very simply, we teach one of the two groups that their work is exercise. Making a bed is like working at this machine at the gym, and so on. So now we have two groups. One group sees their work as exercise, the other doesn't. We take many, many measures. One group isn't working any harder than the other. As far as we could tell, they're not eating more or less than the other group. Nevertheless, by simply changing their minds, they lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down. Remarkable, right? Now, let's go to the last study with many fun studies in between. This I more recently did with Peter Ungle, my graduate student, where what we did was inflict a wound, a minor wound, but a wound nonetheless. And individually, a person who's just been wounded is in front of a clock. And unbeknownst to them, the clock is rigged. So for a third of the people, the clock is going twice as fast as real time. For a third of the people, it's going half as fast as real time. For a third of the people, it's real time. Now, so what? Most people would assume the wound is going to heal when the wound heals. But when the mind sees the amount of time that's passed, that turns out to be the deciding factor. So the wound healed based on clock or perceived time rather than real time. There are so many of these studies, and the bottom line to many of them is that the amount of control we have over our health is enormous.
And to a sense, do you think we've been taught that we don't have control?
Yeah, I do think that. I don't think it was intentional. I don't think somebody said, you have a lot of control, but I'm going to fool you into thinking you don't. Can you hear my dog?
All good. It makes it more natural. So you're known today as the mother of mindfulness.
Yeah.
But when did you first get introduced to this concept of mindfulness?
Again, it's always hard to know exactly what occurred in the past, but my original interest, Tim, was in mindlessness,
Mm,
and it was all around me. My
yeah.
father would constantly leave the house and come back because he forgot his keys. very ordinary things. I walked into a store and bumped into a mannequin and apologized. What's going on here? And then I was going to, I took the job at Harvard. So now I'm going to come to Cambridge, where the naive belief was everybody here in Cambridge was really smart. Okay. I was coming from New York, where people were a different kind of smart. Now, what happened was I saw things that just wouldn't happen in New York. For instance, at that time, banks closed at 3 in the afternoon. That meant that it was okay to park at the bank without getting a ticket, right? Nobody ever did that here. Another bank story, you'd walk into a bank in New York and people would quickly make sure they're as close to the teller as possible. If their line had 6 people in it and the line next to them had 2, they'd quickly, it didn't happen in Cambridge. And so it seemed that there was something different going on from just IQ points. Then, and I don't remember, I've been asked this before, I don't remember who it was, not a very nice person, which I guess is good that I don't remember who it was, said to me, because I was studying mindlessness, "You are what you study." I said, okay. So I started studying mindfulness. I just switched to it. And then I learned about Eastern philosophy and Buddhism and so on, and was very pleased that the conclusions I was coming to from a Western scientific perspective were very consistent with all of that traditional wisdom. But it's very different. When I talk about mindfulness, sometimes people think of meditation. And meditation, we'll find, is not mindfulness. Meditation is a practice you undergo to result, hopefully, in post meditative mindfulness. Mindfulness, as I study it, is more immediate. And it's good that at this point I tell people, what do I mean by being mindful? And it's the very simple process of noticing. Now, when you think you don't notice, right? It's only when you're in a situation that feels new. And the problem of sorts is that since when you're not there because you're mindless, you're not there to know you're not there. So you can't so easily correct it. People say stop and smell the roses or be in the moment. That's sweet, but totally ineffective, because if you're not there and you don't know you're not there, you're not going to make any change. There are 2 ways to be mindful: top down, bottom up. Bottom up is what I was just telling you, that if you notice new things about the things you think you come to see you didn't know them at all anyway. And then your mind naturally goes to that place. You do that often enough. All right. If you live with somebody, if you have a close friend, just notice 3 new things about them. When you walk outside, notice 3 new things. It's brand new, even though it's the same old, same old. The other way is top down, leads you to the same place, which is to recognize that you don't know. Nobody knows. Uncertainty is the rule, it's not the exception. Everything keeps changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives. So when we think we know, we're confusing the stability of our mindsets, in a sense, with the stability of the underlying phenomenon. You can hold it still if you want, but it's not staying still. And so I try to persuade people of this by asking whoever's interviewing me a very simple question. All right. So, Tim, how much is 1 + 1?
In some cases, it's 2. In some cases, it's still 1.
Okay, yes, because you've heard me say this or you've read it. But this is the one fact that everybody thinks they know. And in fact, if you ask somebody who hasn't heard me talk, how much is one, they're going to look at you like you're crazy, not take you seriously, possibly ignore you and walk away. But it turns out that, because we were mindlessly taught an absolute, everything we're taught as absolutes, we then deal with mindlessly. 1 + 1 is 2. All right. But as you revealed, 1 + 1 can also be 1. If you add 1 pile of laundry plus 1 pile of laundry, 1 + 1 is 1. You add 1 cloud plus 1 cloud, 1 + 1 is 1. You add 1 wad of chewing gum. In the real world, it doesn't equal 2 as more often as it does. Now, the beauty of this is that now that you know there are multiple answers to that simple question, all of a sudden you have choices. You didn't have the choice before when you thought it was clearly just 2. Now, everything we're taught by our parents, by teachers, by the books we read, and so on, are teaching us absolutes. They're teaching us things like 1 and 1 is 2. So I was at this horse event, and this man asked me, can I watch his horse for him because he's going to get his horse a hot dog? Okay, I'm a straight A student. This is ridiculous, but I'm going to try to be nice. So I say, sure. Horses are herbivorous. They do not eat meat, period. I learned that absolute fact as well as I learned 1 + 1 is 2. He came back with the hot dog and the horse ate it. And that's when I knew everything I think I know could be wrong, which is actually exciting because that opens a world of possibility. All the things people say can't happen, that you can't do it, it can't be done. Well, how can they possibly know this? Just as they think horses don't eat meat, maybe you can do that thing that somebody has persuaded you can't do.
And tying things back into mind body unity,
Yeah.
I see mindfulness and mind body unity having a real symbiotic relationship. How do you think mindfulness helps us understand?
So when you're mindful, when you're doing anything, all of you is doing it. Your whole body is doing it. And so when you're actively noticing new things, the neurons are firing. And 40 years of research, now closer to 50, says that it's literally and figuratively enlivening. Everything you're going to do better if you're mindful, because when you're mindful, you're noticing the change, right? You're a batter, and the ball is pitched, and if you just mindlessly hit that ball, it'll go wherever it goes. But if you're present, because you don't know, you notice that the left fielder just sneezed. That's a good place to hit the ball.
You've said that you've virtually never experienced stress. I wish I could say the same
Virtually,
about myself.
virtually, it's. Let me tell you a story about that, which is I just told this once. Some of these I keep trying to change the stories, but then the old ones come back, and I try to change them at least slightly. This is kind of interesting, and it speaks to everything we're saying. So, and stress, because it was a situation where, in fact, I was stressed. So, somebody who's very close to me this is at night, is going to stand on the first shelf of this giant armoire to see if there's anything on the top. When she does this, the armoire falls on her. As it falls on her, it forces her to the ground and she cracks her head on concrete. She is bleeding. Had I not been there, she probably would be dead. She can't get out from under. The armoire weighed easily twice what I weigh. Not easy. Let's say it's 150% of what I weigh. It was a heavy thing. And I was able to lift it enough for her to get out. Now, what's interesting to me about this, when I told this story, because this happened at just the end of March, people say, oh, it was the adrenaline. And I go crazy. What do you mean it was the adrenaline? Like, adrenaline has a mind of its own, right? But the
Yeah,
mind body unity, well, I lifted that thing. And when I lifted it, because I needed to, every part of me was organized to help in that event. Now, the difference is I own it. So now I know I'm capable of much more than I would have thought, even with respect to simple weightlifting and so on. If I say it was the adrenaline, how do you know when Mr. Adrenaline is going to come help you again? So what
that's
you
really
asked,
interesting.
I don't know if it answered. It was a fun story because it has a happy ending, so she's fine.
No, that was just really interesting, but I was also just marveling at the fact, and it just seems like you just give off the energy of a person who, and it's clearly stemmed from the work that you've done as well, just somebody who doesn't necessarily get as stressed out as
Well,
much as
yeah,
other
we're
people.
talking about stress. Well, it's interesting though because I don't do the work and then change my life. It's noticing things about me or my response to things or other people's responses that differ that lead to the studies in the first place. But stress What people don't realize is, even though Epictetus said it first a long time ago, events don't cause stress. What causes stress are the views you take of the event. Now, if you take a mindless view, this is going to be awful, how could you not be stressed? If you recognize their advantages, it all depends on the way you frame the information. You don't experience the same kind of stress. But a few things that your listeners might find helpful. One is the simple one liner. Next time you're stressed, ask yourself, is it a tragedy or an inconvenience? This thing with the armoire was close to a tragedy thing, tragic ending. But most of the things, I missed the appointment, I banged the car, I forgot I was supposed to go to your house, whatever. These are just not biggies. And so as soon as you ask that question, then you breathe a sigh of relief. But here's another little thing for people to do. In order to experience stress, two things have to happen. One is you're making a prediction that something will happen, and two, that when it happens, it'll be awful. So next time you're stressed, ask yourself, give yourself 3 reasons why this thing you're fearing might not even happen. Because you went from, oh my God, to, maybe it won't happen, and you tend to feel better right away. The next part is the more fun part, which is, let's assume it's going to happen. How might that actually be an advantage?
Yeah.
And frame it differently. And then, so you come after living a life like this to, if it happens, it'll be good. If it doesn't happen, it'll be good. A funny story. I was telling another podcaster this, and I use as an example that, so if my internet went out right now, all right, I'd go have lunch. Then my internet went out. I think I have these powers that I'm still trying to
Yeah,
harness.
you manifested that into reality. And the thing that I find really interesting about the conversation is stress and bringing this into that mind body unity and really speaking about the body as well here. What I love most about your work, talk to me about how you think the root of sickness, illness, and disease is mindlessness and stress.
Yeah, no, I think stress is the major killer. Now, years ago, um, people followed the hanging crepe philosophy, which was if somebody was dying, they would hang black crepe. Okay, so the translation of that was the medical world would give you the worst possible scenario. So, somebody you care about, you say they're likely to die. Now, because if the person does die, you called it. If the person lives, that's wonderful. But if, on the other hand, you say the person is going to live and the person dies, you're facing lawsuits. So, much of the medical advice many, many years ago was based on preventing lawsuits, saving face. Okay. Once we know that those expectations tend to be fulfilled and stressful, I they can't and typically don't do that anymore. Everybody at this point knows that stress isn't good for you. I believe it's even more not good for you than most people believe. And I was going to do this work right before COVID with scholars in China. We didn't get around to doing it. And now, I don't know, we're talking to the Chinese these days or not. Who knows? It always changes. But we were going to take people who were just diagnosed. It was a very difficult study to do. We wanted to get hundreds of people who were just diagnosed with cancer, different kinds of cancer. Now, if you tell anybody, tell me tomorrow that I have cancer, I'm not going to say, oh, well, who cares? Clearly it's going to be a little stressful. However, some people deal with stress differently, and some are able to handle it and understand it and do the sorts of things that I've been suggesting. My belief was that if we measure your stress level after, let's say, 3 weeks after the diagnosis, and we measure it once a month or once every 2, 3 weeks, that degree of stress will predict the course of the disease over and above nutrition, genetics, and even treatment. That's how important I think stress is. And every time I open a medical journal, which, truth be told, is not very often, but there's, I always see a new study that implicates stress in some disease. So we've gone from your thoughts are irrelevant to your health way back when, to yeah, there's some relationship, to where I think it's the biggest part of the relationship. And the bottom line to that, Tim, is that if stress is a function of your views, not of events, that means we have complete control. So much more control over our health. Now we went, some of the earliest studies I did, I think I mentioned it. We take elderly people. That word's roughly now that I'm 78 years old myself. But okay, we take older folks and we teach them to be mindful, and it turns out they live longer. And we have so much evidence that even if you weren't living longer, you're living better. That when you're mindful, our data show you're charismatic, your relationships are better, your memory, you're more productive, everything. 50 years is a lot of time to do these studies. And the main thing is, it's so simple. All you need to do is know you don't know. And you don't have to feel bad about knowing, because nobody knows. That's the important thing. Because right now, you know when you don't know, but you think you're supposed to know. So you hide, you pretend, you get stressed. Nobody knows. Then everything is new again. And there's a way that I think in my life, this was before we had gamification, but that I always made everything more or less a game. And it was fun. Let me give you a funny example that comes to mind. I was on the stage at graduation with all my colleagues, not all, a large number. And we didn't realize that they were going to be giving out the degrees to every single discipline and subdiscipline at Harvard. And this was going to be a long, drawn out affair. And everybody, So I just made it a game. I said, Eastern Studies. I said 5 PhDs. Someone says 6. Someone says 2. And the time went by very quickly. Everything can be enjoyed, but you don't enjoy it when you think, oh my God, if I do it wrong, all hell is going to break loose, and someone's going to think I'm a moron, or I'm going to lose out in some important way. The point is, if you recognize that our emotions are choices, and when we're mindful, we have many choices to make. Not just 1 and 1 is 1 or 2, as you said, but 1 and 1 can also be 10. If you're
Mm.
using a base 2 number system, 1 plus 1 is written as 10. So there are always choices, and you can always control your response to whatever is happening.
The conversation on how stress manifests physically in the body is
Mhm.
something that resonates with me on a deep, deep level. It was a vicious cycle that I was in for a long time where the stress was manifesting into really bad physical
Yeah,
pain.
yeah.
And a key part of how people can get out of that loop, and it's a phrase that I hadn't heard of until I found your work, looking at mindfulness deeper from a physical health perspective. Can you talk to me about the importance of symptom variability and how that can help people?
Yeah, so it's very interesting that, so when I talked about mind body unity in the book, um, um, it occurred to me, and I mentioned already, that placebos are basically our strongest medicine. How can we give ourselves a placebo? Um, but you can't, because you can't fool yourself. Give it and say, "I'm going to make believe this is effective for it." So that's what I was trying to do, because if you recognize that when you take a placebo, the placebo isn't curing you, you're curing yourself. So
Yeah.
how do you get you can do this yourself, and without somebody making believe that this pill is something that it's not, and so on? And so I came up with this attention to symptom variability. Now that sounds like a mouthful. All it means is noticing change. It's just being mindful. Mindfulness is noticing change, noticing differences. Okay. So now when you're diagnosed with some chronic illness, what people tend, I think, to believe is that their symptoms are going to stay the same or get worse. Nothing stays the same. There's always slight variation. Okay, so the stock market. If the stock market is going up, it doesn't go up in a straight line. It goes up, down a little, up, and so on. Or down, doesn't go down in a straight line. Hopefully, at any rate, it's the same thing with our symptoms. So what we did was call people with various diseases, one disease at a time, and we'd say to them, "How is your symptom now? And is it better or worse than the last time we called? And why?" Now, several things happen with this. The first, when people have a chronic illness, they feel helpless. So now that they're engaged in this potential treatment, right away, you don't need to wait to have the final diagnosis or anything to do with the medical world. You tend to feel better. Second, as soon as you see that the symptom has changed and it's not always terrible, you immediately feel better. Third, that when you ask the question, why is it better? You can even ask, why is it worse now? Why is it better? That engages you in a mindful search. What's different today? Was it the banana I ate, the fact that I slept an extra 20 minutes? And that itself is good for your health. And finally, I believe that you're more likely to find a solution if you're looking for one. And we did this with serious disorders: Parkinson's, stroke, multiple sclerosis, arthritis, and others. And in each case, found a significant reduction in symptoms. And you can do this while you're taking medicine. There are no negative side effects of this, at least none that I can see. It's also the case for stress. There are some people who think they're always stressed. Nobody is always anything. So now, how do you do this for yourself? Because I said I wanted to find something as if you're taking a placebo to help yourself. You don't have to have somebody else call you. Everybody has a smartphone, or borrow one or buy one, get it used one, it doesn't matter. And set it to ring to, in a half hour. And when it rings, ask yourself, so how is the symptom now? Is it better or worse than the last time, and why? Then set it to ring in an hour and 15 minutes. It doesn't matter. Just keep varying the time. And you do this a week, 2 weeks, and it's amazing. So with the stress, you might say, so you think you're stressed all the time. Now your phone rings. Hey, well, right now I'm not stressed. Why is that? I'm not sure. And you make some guesses. Then you said it rings again. And this time, Tim, you say you're really stressed. And you realize you're talking to Ellen Langer. Okay, so we keep doing this, and you say, I'm maximally stressed when I'm talking to. The solution is easy. Don't talk to me, right? Or talk to me differently. And again, you're helping yourself because you don't feel helpless, because you're being mindful while you're doing it. So even if you don't come up with the ultimate answer, you're still going to be better off for having gone through the process.
And I think what's really helpful there is that you become an observer of the sensations and curious about the sensations rather than identifying with it and being like, this is a part of
Right.
who I
And
am.
also good. That's very good, because in part, what you also know, it's just a sensation. And what makes a sensation so scary is the assumption is that it's not going to go away by calling it pain, and so on. Yeah. Good for you.
Yeah. And I'm speaking from personal experience here again. It's like, yeah, pain or these different things that we feel in our body, it's simply a sensation, but then it's our mind that creates the entire narrative and story behind that sensation, which exacerbates the feeling of that sensation.
Yeah. We're constantly telling ourselves stories, without the realization that there are 10, 20 other stories that would just as easily,
Yeah.
fit the data.
You've said that if you were to get sick, you would go through the medical world, but you wouldn't
Yeah,
just,
well, I wanted to make clear that, I have a great deal of respect for physicians. I teach these kids before they go to medical school.
yeah.
And, they're caring, smart, people. And so I didn't want anything I was saying to diminish these people as a group, but nevertheless to offer an alternative to some of the medical care. And so, yes, of course, if there were something the matter, I would go, but I wouldn't go the same way most people would go. I would not just turn myself over to people. I smashed my ankle many years ago, and I was told that I'd never walk without a limp, but I don't listen well. And I forgot that I wasn't supposed to walk without a limp, and I don't have a limp. And it hasn't affected my tennis in any way, and so on. The main thing, and we go back to the horses don't eat meat, recognizing that all science gives us, which can be a lot, but it's not everything, is probabilities. So you run a study with a certain number of horses that are a certain degree of hungry, and you give them certain kinds of meat mixed with certain kinds of grain, and you might find that most of those horses didn't eat it. Now that's a mouthful. So the only way you report that is say horses don't eat meat. But it's not true. That it occurred to me earlier today because I have an old dog, and they tell you dogs, small dogs, maybe live to 18, 19. And so most people think, well, maybe 20. But how do they get these numbers?
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that if I were fabulously wealthy, or even now fabulously busy, or fabulously poor, and my dog died at 30, it would occur to me to let somebody know. In other words, we don't know the outliers.
Yeah.
And so whatever they would tell me would be likely. I wouldn't take as this will happen. It wouldn't become a self-fulfilling prophecy. All right, that's one of the important differences. And I would be doing the attention to symptom variability. And I would be questioning and giving information about myself to know that every piece of medical information are based on norms. What most people that they looked at in certain situations do, feel, experience. And in some ways, none of us is us. So I would let them know the way my life was not normative.
What are your thoughts on medical imaging and how that is perception based rather than,
What do you mean
or
by medical imaging?
like MRI imaging,
Oh,
and how we create these stories and narratives about them, but what we like to be
yeah.
told is this
Yeah.
is what is.
Yeah, no, I think it's like everything else that it's true sometimes for some people in some ways. And it shouldn't be given to us as if we know just what this means, because then people give up when in fact they might find solutions that the medical world is not aware of. That had I been believed that I would have to walk with a limp, it probably would have affected the way I walk. And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Um, that there's some interesting data. People, um, uh, turns out, can live longer when they're waiting for something, their grandchild to get married or
Interesting.
whatever. And yeah, there's some very real way we control, ourselves, our health, that it's just surprising we don't take advantage of it. And even with placebos, I was thinking about this again the other day, that if you have some injury and you take a placebo and you heal, if you were told it was a placebo, you'd probably argue. You'd say, no, 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 the pain was real, because placebos have gotten a bad name. And they've gotten a bad name, I think, because of the pharmaceutical companies. Because in order to bring a drug to market to make billions of dollars, that drug has to outperform a placebo. So you put the two in an experiment. Damn it, that placebo was really good. But for the rest of us who aren't going to make any money off these pills, I think we need to reorganize our thoughts to realize just what we're able to do, and it's no different in some very maybe silly way. You're a little kid, and your father or mother is holding the back of the bicycle while you're pedaling along, and you think they're there, and they stop. And then, but that child is taught to see, look, you can do it yourself. And that's the part of this that we haven't been taught, that I'm trying to make people aware of.
Everything really is up to interpretation. And the question becomes, okay, how do we take control of that interpretation and make it work for us rather than against us? And when it's getting into physical health, you have this great quote in your first book that says, if one can reinterpret a painful stimulus, it may cease to be painful. Once the stimulus is reinterpreted, the mind is unlikely to return to that original interpretation. And that's exactly the process that I went through,
Mm.
not like knowingly, but looking back in it in hindsight.
What happened to you?
So, like I said, I dealt with a lot of bad chronic back pain, and I was told because of herniated discs. I
Mm.
was shown this MRI image of like, you have two badly herniated discs. That is what is causing your pain. And so I took that interpretation. And it's not so much because I, naturally created that interpretation, but that's just what I was told. And so I thought my body's broken, I'm damaged. When I would feel pain, would go into fight or flight mode,
Yeah,
uh, which would cause a lot of stress. And then, as we've been talking about here, that stress manifested into more physical pain.
yeah,
And it just created this vicious cycle.
yeah. No, it's interesting when you mentioned the MRI, because you had asked me this, and I had thought about doing a study. It'd be difficult to do, and it may be unethical. I'm not doing it, but if you were shown, let's say you have cancer, and you see the tumor, and let's say the tumor is, I don't know, 2 inches in diameter. And then a week later, you were shown another picture of your tumor, but this one was doctored and you didn't know it. And the tumor was now half of that size. I think that people would then organize themselves, and next time at the doctor, if it existed at all, it'd be even smaller.
Well, the thing for me as well, so I was dealing with pain, but then didn't get the MRI image until like 2 months into feeling pain.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I got that image, the pain went through the roof. It
Yeah,
skyrocketed
yeah,
because I had this confirmation now
yeah, yeah.
of like, oh, there's this massive problem. But the fascinating thing is, it's a hypothesis, but I think if I got another MRI image today, it would still look the same or even worse potentially. Um, but mind body work and understanding mind body unity is what got me out of pain.
Mhm.
And that's where that reinterpretation happened for me, because I shifted from this pain is a problem, this pain means I'm broken, to okay, this pain is a message that I need to unpack and understand and observe rather than identify with, and creating that detachment. Um, and that's how I healed. And the reason why
I would argue that if all that you're saying is totally authentic, that if you got that new MRI, you'd be pleased with what they saw. It would not be the same as the past. Because what you're doing with that is saying, my mind is okay, my body is still pretty sick. And if we make it one thing, that as you're curing your mind, your body is healing.
so you think that my MRI imaging would look better compared to the
Yes,
first time?
yes,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
I would have to disagree, but
Well, I see, if you disagree, then you're going to win, because what you're doing is controlling what it will look like. Um,
interesting.
it's all one thing.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
I'm glad you're feeling well.
Do you think when understanding mind body unity, it can only be truly appreciated through experience and more dire that experience, the better the understanding. Because, like, for me personally, I wouldn't have such a great appreciation for your work, or I don't think I would understand these concepts as deeply if it wasn't just me, like, really experiencing it on a deep level for myself.
Well, I've gotten so much feedback from so many people, and I don't think that all of them, or even half of them, have had the kind of severe experience, physical experience you had. So that would argue against that. I think that we all have experiences in our own life. I mean, the simple thing, you see somebody vomiting, nothing's happening to you, and all of a sudden you feel that you yourself are going to regurgitate. How could that be? It's just a thought. And there are probably times where you just couldn't afford to get sick. You feel a cold coming on, and you can't afford it right now. I mean, you're going out with this person for the first time, you've been looking forward to it for 3 years, or you've got this project, whatever it is, and then you just don't let yourself get sick. um, and so there was this study I write about, not by me, or it was more a demonstration, but there are these people, there was this hospital where there was a ward that was called the hopeless ward. People were beyond hope. And what they were going to do was renovate the floor. And so to renovate it, they had to move all of the people. So now you're in the hopeless, and now all of a sudden you're in the hopeful, right? But then the renovation was finished and they moved them back, and then people died in some ways inexplicably. That the power is real, and everybody has examples of it. We've all heard of people who are told they have 6 months to live, and 5 years later, they're still having a fine time with life. Um, so I think that if you were to read The Mindful Body, whether or not you've had any particular serious illness yourself, now also we all know people who've had these illnesses, but let's say you don't know any of those, that you then start looking for confirmation. And it's a nice story. You want to get the confirmation. You're going to find it. It's all around. How our expectations mislead us. How we thought we couldn't do something. Doesn't have to be a health related thing. And then all of a sudden we were able to do it. Or you just say to yourself, why do I believe this? When I was younger, there was a certain weight that I was, and I believed, and I would, from that point, gain 15 pounds and then lose the 15 again. Okay. And I always felt I could never get thinner than that point. And then, this would happen if I were listening to me now. Okay. Why? Where does this come from? And after that, then I was able to lose more than that 15 pounds. So we just have to start asking us our questions. Where do we get this information from? Why are we so sure? Medical information are only probabilities. They're only maybes. Sometimes they're not absolutes. It's not the case for everybody. So why do I think it'll necessarily be the case for me? And the main thing is, when you think you can't do something health wise or just any other part of your life, and you go ahead and you try, the trying is the fun. Once you succeed, then it goes away. I mean, in an example I use too frequently, but I'll use it now one more time, that you're a little kid, you're in an elevator, you try to press that button, you can't reach it. An adult picks you up, you press it. Great. And this goes on and on. You still can't reach it. Then eventually, now you're in that elevator and you can reach it. That's the end, right? When was the last time, Tim Doyle, you were excited about pressing that elevator button? You
Long
know,
time ago.
so when we recognize that the end result is just not what we're after. What we're after is the experience of the challenges in life. And challenges sound like, oh my God, if I miss, bad things will happen. But again, we go back to no. Our experience is solely a function of the views we take. The more mindful, the more possible views you have available to yourself. And, so there's everything to be gained by being mindful, nothing to be lost, and it's so easy. And it's what you're doing when you're having fun. You're not having fun when you're doing a crossword puzzle where you already know the answers, you know, or when you walk into an elevator. For most people, pressing that button. For me, it's fun because I'll, press it when no one is there without looking to see, kind of figure out about where, to make everything a game. But mindfulness is energy begetting. It's fun. It's easy, and it's literally and figuratively enlivening.
I love how you say that it's fun and easy to be mindful and having that perception on things, because I think a lot of the time, and this is something that I struggled with unknowingly and unconsciously for a while, like we think that the things that can have real benefits in our life or really help us, like, oh, this is going to be hard to do, or like, this is going to take a lot of work. And it's like, no, that's not the reality of it. I'm just putting that lens onto this.
Well, if something is takes a lot of effort, the feeling is it better pay off. you know.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with you. Basically that if it's hard, it's worth doing. People have to understand that all sorts of wonderful things are happening to them when they're having fun. And that, we have these notions that I argue against about work life. Now some people say you should have work life balance. What does that mean, Tim? That means that work has to be bad. So you have to balance it with some good things. Well, I couldn't imagine having a job where I'm doing that work 40 hours a week and hating it. I mean, life is too short, and anything can be made fun. And if you can't find a way to make it fun, get out. If we believe that work has to be bad, so you can believe work has to be bad, but there's nothing you can do about it, then the next level is, oh, okay, if I add some fun time to my life, and that's better. But as I write in the Mindful Body, there's always a better than better solution. And what you want instead of work life balance, I believe, is work life integration. You want to be essentially the same happy person no matter what you're doing. And that doesn't mean, that if you're doing some very serious thing that you have to be laughing while you're doing it. But you're not taking yourself to task when you're doing it. You're not worrying about whether or not you'll complete it. You're just totally engaged. And when you do that, again, the neurons are firing, and everything in your life will improve.
And I think that's one of the hidden benefits of going through physical ailments, because when you come to the realization of like, oh, there's a lot of variability and interpretation here with what I'm feeling physically, and then you're able to use that framing as well of like, oh, where else in my life is that happening where
Yeah,
I have an interpretation that really isn't working in my favor?
yeah. No, that's great. I wish people did more of that, but I tend to think they don't. But maybe after listening to you, they will.
To take a step out of the conversation and understanding the trajectory of mind body unity in this space on a macro level, and to use Schopenhauer's three stages of truth philosophy, so ridicule, violent opposition, and accepted as self evident. I don't think we're in the accepted as self evident when it comes to mind body unity, but where do you see with this space and mind body unity, like within that timeline?
Well, I wouldn't dare try to make such a prediction, but I do believe we're getting closer to acceptance. I haven't gotten much pushback, and I gave a talk. I guess, gee, it must have been 10 years ago already, and I thought it was just to these people who had cancer, and it turned out that about 20% of the audience were physicians. And when I found that out afterwards, I thought, oh, but they applauded it, because they know they don't know. And so all I'm saying is fess up. None of us know. Finding out is fun. Involve the people in their own healthcare. They should be making these decisions. So I think we're moving further and further in that direction. I know when I started this, people weren't talking about mind body connection. And every time I hear it, I go, oh, okay, well, it's good. We're making some movement, because if you have mind and body that are unconnected, okay, how do they deal with each other? If they're connected, how are they connected? It's the same problem. But if at least everybody acknowledges mind body connection, then it's a smaller step to mind body unity. So
That's really interesting because I'm still in the framework of mind body connection, and um, that's how I understand it. I'm just now taking those first steps to understanding it as mind body
well,
unity.
and when you understand it fully, then the degree of control you have explodes. So it's very exciting, and it's the kind of thing that once you get a taste of some of this, you want more. So it's not like it's going to last for. Somebody called me; they were doing, I don't know, some thesis, and they said, "Dr. Langer, is mindfulness just a fad?" I said, "What, like the hula hoop?" I said, look, if every day you make toast and you burn the toast, and someone shows you all you need to do is turn that dial a slight bit, and you no longer burn the toast, is that going to go away unless you prefer burnt toast? No. That it's all a matter of learning a different way of being that doesn't require any major shifts. It just requires accepting you don't know. Nobody knows. That's kind of exciting. And that you have choices that you haven't even explored. And there's so much more on the happy level that I talk about in the mindful body. We focus just on um, you know physical health, but there's a lot in the book about happiness, which itself, now, if you're happy, that's going to affect your whole body. People drink to your health and happiness. And I don't know, you could argue maybe it should be to your happiness and health, but it's one thing.
I like that notion of nobody knows, so let's collaborate over that unknowingness. Is there a question that you have that really energizes you or still drives your work forward?
Oh gosh, on every day, there are three or four things that happen that become interesting to me. The other day there was a moth, and I go to catch the moth, and I didn't catch him. And then I thought, well, I'm smarter than that moth. Shouldn't I be able to catch him? And what's going on here? So um, I don't think I'm going to start studying moths, but I could imagine that that simple little thing would say that what I'm doing is attending to where the moth is rather than where the moth is going. And perhaps in life, that's what we do too often. We respond without realizing we're going to need another response. You say something bad, I hang up on you. Um, and that's that. But if I thought that if I hang up on you, what's going to happen next? Is at the end of our relationship? I don't want it, and so on. That maybe I would choose a different response. So they start with whatever is happening, and then they grow, and sometimes they die just as quickly, and some other thought comes to mind.
To bring another component into it, because so we've been looking at things in terms of this dual relationship between mindlessness and mindfulness. To hypothesize here, I came up with like another term called mindfilledness, where it's like you're going past mindfulness in a way where it's like, okay, I'm just constantly focused on awareness to the point of just living in my head.
Sure, sure. I mean, that when I generate dichotomy, we could put in 12 different stages and 14 different kinds of mindfulness, and so on. It was hard to get enough to get people to just accept that most of the time they're mindless. But
Yeah.
certainly each time we do this, we learn something, as long as we don't buy into these categories as existing independent of us. But sure, I had thought that you can be mindful, you can be mindful about what you're being mindful. And, perhaps there's a point where, I mean, I don't walk around noticing new things about things. I don't need to because I don't think I know them. And I think, actually, the better lesson for people is it's never to your advantage to be mindless. So you should always either, at every moment, either be mindful or potentially mindful. But as soon as you think you know, that's when you're in trouble.
Most people know you as a professor of psychology. You have the title Mother of Mindfulness. But there's another title that I know you hold with great pride, which is that you've been considered an artist as well. How have creativity and painting played into your work?
Okay, well, we don't have time to really go into that, but I wrote a book called I'm Becoming an Artist, which tells of my journey. And it's really a book about interpersonal mindfulness, which I think people would enjoy, although it has 20 of my paintings in there. And, it was fun because when I gave the book to Random House, the title I had was Mindful Creativity. They came back with on becoming an artist. And oh, wow, yeah, I loved it. I think the book would have done better had it been called Mindful Creativity because more people would have known what it was actually about. But yeah, no, it's been fun. And what I would do, I still do it, but at the beginning, I would paint and then I'd have some experience. And then I wondered whether that experience was just me or, was it more broadly true? And so then I'd run a study and, so I'd be back and forth with all of it. That one piece of that was important to me was about mistakes. That, if you're mindful, you can't make a mistake because to make a mistake is to believe you're doing something different from what you were supposed to be doing and you can't know. And so we do some research there with art where I was in the hospital with a smashed ankle and I'm painting and having a good time. And people need to understand that I was one of those kids who couldn't draw. So for me, this was at 50 years old, all of a sudden, a brand new way of being. And the nurse would, kept watching and it's like she wanted in, but she didn't know how. I said, come paint with me. And then I said to her, it doesn't become fun until you make a mistake. Because all of a sudden, if you make a mistake and you realize it makes no sense to go back to where you were, to try to make it work, because how do you know that that was a good place to be? But from that point, after you've made a mistake, since it was unintentional, now you're in brand new territory. You don't have a plan and let it just unfold. And it's great fun. It's fun cooking. It's fun taking photographs. It's fun doing virtually anything as long as you don't follow a roadmap or a recipe to doing it.
Your book, The Mindful Body, was originally a memoir, but
Yeah.
then it evolved into, as you say, an idea memoir. How much of your work is about having your ideas remembered rather than just yourself? And what do you hope people carry forward from those ideas?
Yeah, it's interesting. Somebody else a while back asked me something similar, which surprised me. I'd never thought about that. I don't write anything for posterity. I don't think in terms of posterity. I think of right now, that I said yes to your invitation in the hope that, somebody will have some takeaway that'll be useful to them. Um, and, so as far as me personally, as I've gotten older, my ego has come under control. I'm still not beyond, hey, I said that 20 years ago, which I hate myself when that happens, but so be it. It's not such a biggie. No, since I was a little girl, which you find if you read the book, it's all full of research and new ideas. But that I I was lucky. I had parents that were wonderfully supportive. So I was a happy kid. I'm a happy adult. And as a little kid, I'm always, well, why don't you look at it this way? When somebody was unhappy. So I have a whole lifetime of this. And so in some sense, it feels with each book I write, it's a giving back. I think, at this point, if people don't want to take it seriously, there's not much more I can do. I'll come spend my more time painting. But I think that it feels good to think that somebody may take up on this information. And, it's very nice to live your life where I see myself as sharing, not selling. That I've told you this is what I honestly feel. If you use it, wonderful. If you don't, that's up to you.
What is so beautiful about all your work too is that it's timeless, and maybe not somebody, there are people right now, but there might be somebody, 30 or 40 years from now who comes across your work and is like, wow, this had a profound impact on me. Ellen, it's been a real honor to be able to talk with you today. Where can people go to connect with you and see more of all the work that you're doing?
My website, Ellen Langer, I think it's .me. If you put .com, that'll also get you there, or just Google my name, and lots of stuff comes up. But I guess things are so sophisticated now. If you just ask Chat, "What books have I written?" most of them will come up, not all of them. And yeah, so it's easy to find out about people and ideas these days. So that helps me believe that we're in the midst of an evolution in consciousness, and it's nice to play a part in moving that forward.
Awesome. Great talking with you today.
Same here. Thank you, Tim.